it's me, Kristen. Sorry, I was turning the volume down. Anyway, so I thought we'd have a little fireside chat about racism today. Yeah, so, the world's kind of exploding apart. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it a little, I guess. Well, okay. So anyway, I was talking to my therapist today, and I told him that I read somewhere, I can't remember, I heard somewhere, it might have been a Facebook post or an article I read or something, that, in the United States, we are almost all willing to admit that we have a problem with racism. But there are no racists in America. Which is, of course absurd. But, because it's become like a boogeyman sort of word that people aren't willing to admit they're racist, So, what I was talking about my therapist with my therapist about was, the whole Bad Bunny halftime show with the Super Bowl, and how people are freaked out because, sorry, I didn't mean to scream at you, freaked out because the songs were in Spanish. Now, I'm not really sure why it's a problem, except that people are racist. But you can't call people racist. So my therapist and I were talking, we're like, well, maybe it's still a little disingenuous to say, hey, you're a racist, because it means like the person is like nothing but a racist. When of course people are more nuanced than that. Not that we need to let them off the hook. But maybe it would be more productive to say, hey, you're behaving like a racist. Or, no, you're engaging in racist behavior. You can tell my therapist is a bit of a cognitive behavior therapist. So, anyway, I don't know about that. But anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stuff I'm reading, too, because I'm taking a class on disability history, and it's interesting because racism, eugenics, and it's all tied up together. Sexism, it's all like sort of one big pile of goo. And so I was reading this article by what's his name? I gotta see what page this is on. I'll get back to it. Anyway, by Douglas Bainton, out of the Disabilities Studies Reader. Anyway, in this one part, it's just incredible to me. So I gotta put my glasses on in order to read this. My eyes are a little blurry. So, in the 1850s, this was before the Civil War in 1865, 1863, whatever. So in 1851, this medical doctor, Dr. Samuel Cartwright, and this is like par for the course. This is kind of how things went back then. They're making justifications for slavery and like medicalizing it. So this article talks about how things like racism and sexism, immigration problems are tied into this eugenics sort of like you must be defective in some way if you're this other, type person. So if you're black, if you're female, if you're an immigrant, you must be an other, So, so this Dr. Samuel Cartwright in 1851 was describing two types of mental illnesses. The first, only black people could have these mental illnesses, of course. The first was drapetomania, which is a condition that caused slaves to run away. Not that you want to seek freedom or anything. It's just like you have this mental condition that causes you want to run away. Okay, and then this other part that he says he says the need to submit to a master was built into the very bodies of African Americans, in whom we see genuflexit, written in the physical structure of his knees being more flexed or bent than any other kind of man. So it's like, oh, well, you can bend your knees more. That means you must be bending at the knees to bend down to your master. So that's why your body is the way it is. It's just like, I mean, I'm not making this up. This is like documented stuff. And then the other, so this Cartwright guy talks about 2 mental illnesses supposedly African Americans had. Dysesthesia Achiopius, so it's medicalized terminology. I can't even pronounce it. This one resulted in a desire to avoid work and generally to cause mischief. It was commonly known to overseers as rascality. Oh, that's rich. And then I was reading this and I'm just like, did these doctors like have no clue that they were being completely racist? And then I'm like, well, did the word racism even exist then? So I had to look that up. And apparently this guy, let me just make sure I got his name right. Supposedly the Oxford English Dictionary's first recorded use of the word racism was by a man named Richard Henry Pratt in 1902, and he was railing against the evils of racial segregation. Oh, that sounds good, right? But the problem is he was basically for forced assimilation, basically. He is much better remembered for a very different coinage: kill the Indian, save the man. Oh, I'm sorry, that's so awful. But anyway, so he was instrumental in like making the Indian schools where they forced the Indian kids or Native American kids into the schools. What are they called? Boarding schools for Native American children, where they would cut them off from their families, not allow them to speak their native language. They could only speak English. They were harshly abused, and they'd cut their hair off, and it was just many children died in these institutions, and it was. So this guy who had a good start of the right idea to get rid of segregation, but then went all the way over to forced assimilation, so that's not good. But anyway, so this article by Bainton that I'm reading is the way it relates to disability is like, okay, so they're trying to medicalize and like pathologize people who are other, like even women who wanted the right to vote. They would say, your uterus is floating around or something, or or like you can't be a politician, or you can't vote because you might faint, or you're crazy because you want to vote, stuff like that. And then with immigration at Ellis Island, they'd be like, well, you can't come into this country because you look a certain way, or you don't walk fast enough, or your foot is smaller than the other foot, or some crazy ass reason. Anyway, so it all relates back to disability, because like all these excuses for discriminating against people were based in kind of like pathologizing people. But the interesting thing is that because people were fighting against being pathologized, they didn't seem to realize that, the feminists are especially bad for this in the early 20th century. They would throw the disabled people under the bus, because like no one's out there saying, hey, it's okay to be disabled. Just because someone is disabled doesn't make them less than human. But then, a lot of the early feminists got involved in the eugenics movement, which is just, so gross. And, because, so this, interplay between racism, disabilityism, I don't know if that's a thing, sexism, xenophobia, things like that. It's interesting that, there's this like core element of discrimination against people who might be disabled in some way, or even if they're not really, but then like people will say they are, and then that becomes an excuse to dehumanize or discriminate against them, or put them in an institution, lock them away, make them slaves, enslave them, whatever. So I never really thought about how, kind of it's like a core issue in intersectional racism, sexism, isms, whatever. The disability aspect I hadn't really ever thought about. So this article is interesting to me. Anyway, the whole Bad Bunny thing, with people freaking out about someone singing in Spanish. I mean, it's a real problem in the United States. As I go back to the thing I started with how the U.S. has a problem with racism, but they're no racists. So, like, how do we solve this? I mean, I think I'm a person who likes to solve things. Like, things like seem like puzzles to me sometimes, I guess. And like, I feel like things can be solved. Now, whether or not they can be, that's another story. But I've always had this strong desire to like solve racism, I guess. I don't know why. It's like an impossible puzzle. It's impossible to get it to not happen. Excuse me, but like, I remember being in 4th grade and I was just like, yeah, Martin Luther King, he's awesome. Like, and then it just like blossomed from there. I'm not exactly sure when I learned about Martin Luther King, but I'm pretty sure I knew by 4th grade who he was. But, a white girl growing up in white America, you don't learn about the famous black people very early in life, let me just say. But it's so funny though, because I had a music teacher, Miss Nishitani, who, she was Asian, and I can't even imagine seeing this as a kid, as an adult when I was a kid. But so this is the 70s and 80s, whatever. And Miss Nishitani had us sing slave songs, like, what was it? Something about, I'll go down in my grave before I'll be a slave, or something. I can't remember exactly. It was a long time ago. I was in like 4th grade, 3rd grade, I don't know, something. So she snuck some like really good songs in there. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And there'll be, I mean, I can't even believe that we sang these songs in school. I loved it, like, compared to like high school when the crazy Christian nationalist teacher had us singing like Christian songs, like, like, I can't even describe them, but it was a good way. And we also sang, because this was a popular song at the time, I have to give her credit for this, the Cherokee Nation song, which was, they took the whole Cherokee Nation, put us on this reservation, took away our ways of life, tomahawk and the Bowie knife, Cherokee Nation, Cherokee pride, so proud to live, so proud to die. Anyway, that was a popular song in the 70s. I mean, I think we had a more respectful in some ways, progressive in some ways country back then, because I mean, it was not good, but it was better than it is now, I think, because now you just have this outlandish white nationalist, just beyond the pale of racism people out there just spewing hate. And you know, back when I was a kid, there was a goal of racial unity, at least for some of us, you know, because I guess we had just gone through the 60s. I wasn't alive in the 60s, but you know, the country had gone through the 60s, the civil rights movement, the feminist women's rights movement. They'd been through Vietnam. It was like I was born at the end of Vietnam, basically, and the world was different back then. You know, we didn't have the internet, of course, so there weren't like trolls in your computer at your face, you know. But it really impresses me now to think about how Miss Nishitani slipped some, you know, like really progressive ideas in there with the music that we sang. We didn't know what we were singing about, really, you know, because we're like, I'm a kid, whatever. But now, if you tried to sing any of these songs in school, there would be an uproar. There'd be, you know, the parents back then are like, whatever. The kids are singing, and what good for them. You know, they're not out doing drugs, at least, you know, whatever. So, I don't know. Oh, but I have to tell you this also. So it was the 70s, and my 4th grade teacher, Mr. Sturley, he was a hoot. He would call everyone lover. Hey, lover. You know, that would never fly in this day and age. You know, calling 4th grade students lovers. But he also, so we would go to the gym and like hop around and dance to music and stuff. And one of the songs we danced to was Let's Get Physical. Like, let's get physical, physical. You know, Olivia Newton-John. But of course, we didn't know. We thought, oh, we're getting physical. We're moving around and bouncing around. So we had no idea what the song actually meant, you know, of course. So he had us bopping and bouncing around to that. It was just funny. Also in the 4th grade, I mean, the 4th grade was pretty good year, I have to say. We dissected squid in the classroom. There was before any kind of like PPE or, you know, like the precautionary gloves or sanitation stuff. So we dissected squid in the 4th grade, and then we fried them up and ate them. I did not eat mine because I was like, I don't like, what was it, shrimp or whatever? Squid. Sorry, squid. So, yeah. So that was another thing we did back in the 70s that wouldn't fly now. But, you know, thinking back to the 70s, even in some ways, you know, TV was a little more progressive. I mean, we had the commentary with, what was that show? All in the Family, I think it was what it was called, with a crotchety old guy who was a racist, but he was portraying a racist on there, and then like his kids were like more progressive and like hippies and stuff, and then you know, we had Good Times, and what was that one with the Drummond's. The name escapes me right now. Different Strokes. And I don't know. It seems like there was sort of more progressive TV back then. Because it wasn't just like, oh, here's some black people on the TV. They were, saying some pretty controversial things, and I think I heard a story about the woman who played, I'm not a Trekkie, so I can't remember the names of the people. Uhura, is that what her name was? Uhura, I can't remember. The one black lady on Star Trek back in the old days. So she fought to do something on that show, like somebody fought for something on that show related to her because she was like the only black woman on the show, I think, at that time. And what was the other thing I was thinking of? Anyway, I don't know. It's just yeah, anyway, I don't know what I'm thinking of. I'm just like rambling. This is a super long video. I don't know if anyone will watch it. But I just think, if we don't talk about racism, then we'll never get anywhere. And people are like so triggered by the word, by racism, by racist, I'm like, I'm sorry, white people, you got to get over your triggering of the word and realize that you need to change your behavior, sort of thing. Like, I'm sure I'm racist in ways that I don't even realize. Just because I am a white person, I've grown up in a mostly white area, for most of my life. I lived in other places, but, if someone called me racist, I'd be like, oh, yeah, I know, that sucks. I gotta figure out how to, here's the fixing thing again. I gotta figure out how to be less racist, So, I just think we need to work on it more rather than screaming at each other. But, I want to scream at people. I feel like screaming at people when they are behaving in such egregious ways, why is it so bad to have a Super Bowl halftime show in Spanish? What is so wrong with that? You got these, I just don't get it. And I heard it was a great show. I mean, I've seen outtakes, and some of the outtakes are really great, so I just haven't watched it because I'm not a Super Bowl fan. And I don't even know what I was doing then. I was probably working on homework. But I just wanted to share these thoughts with you guys. I don't even know what I'm saying or what it matters, but I just feel like we need to talk about it. We need to figure it out, because humans are not improving by being racist, by holding on to this past of tribalistic thought or something. That's what other thing I was talking about my therapist with. Because I'm taking a Greek and Roman history class as well. And so the Greeks were more according to what the stuff I've read, they were very tribalistic. They were you're either part of our society or you're a barbarian. So, it was kind of a tribalistic mentality, and the Romans were a little bit different in that they just wanted to gather up as much soldiers as they could, basically, I think, because they would go and conquer places. They'd say, well, you want to be a soldier for us, that okay, you can be a part of our culture, but you might not be able to get very far in the culture, but you could be a soldier, and that's okay. Or they'd take them back and make them slaves. It wasn't racially based, though. It was just more oh, we captured you because we conquered this area. Now you come back and be our slaves. And I'm not sure how the Greeks had slaves. Like, they must have captured people too from, uh, like fighting and stuff. But the thing was, the Greeks really were very tribalistic, and of course, throughout human history, people have had to be tribalistic in order to survive. Because you need to be a part of some community in order to, actually survive in the wilderness or whatever back in the day. We're talking, long, long time ago. So I guess racism is like a part of that tribalistic sort of mentality, but I'm not sure. It just seems like it might be. So I don't know if it's evolutionarily ingrained in us to be tribalistic. And maybe it's something we can overcome. Maybe just realizing that we are a part of the human tribe, that differences are good and should be celebrated, but except for, like wanting to kill other people, that really shouldn't be celebrated. I mean, yeah. Or, genocide. You don't really want to celebrate genocide. That's not a good part of being human. You don't want to celebrate, degrading other people or raping or killing, harming. Those aren't things to be celebrated. So, obviously, yeah. I'm just rambling at this point. Okay. Well, that gives you some things to think about. And I guess that's it. Talk to you guys later. Bye.